his Sunday presentations, but instructs me to formally announce that beginning August, Monday the 28th, he will begin through Social Justice Magazine a series of weekday broadcasts, Monday through Friday, over the 50,000-watt station WCKY to serve Southern Ohio, Kentucky, parts of Michigan, and Indiana. Next week, an announcement will be made of importance to persons living in Pennsylvania, particularly in the Philadelphia region. Today's broadcast is of such vital interest to the laboring men of America that I shall pause at this point while the Little Flower Choristers will sing for us Brahms' Lullaby. During the singing of this hymn, please phone to some friend and ask him to join you in listening to this broadcast.
My
Ladies and gentlemen, may I now present Father Coughlin. Following this address, copies of which will be mailed to all who request them, the Voice of Social Justice, which presents the weekday broadcast, will speak to you on an article which appeared in this week's Jewish Examiner. And now may I present Father Coughlin and his address entitled, To the Laboring Men.
Ladies and gentlemen and friends, of prime interest to the American working man is the program recently launched by the American Federation of Labor for the automotive industry. Among the objectives set down by this well-organized, well-officered, and thoroughgoing American labor group is the living annual wage. You are aware that Michigan, and particularly Detroit, has been the arena of an industrial warfare. You remember that during the past few years, hundreds of wasteful, unauthorized strikes causing a loss of hundreds of millions of dollars to the citizens at large characterized this warfare. And more than that, you will recollect that the sit-down, now declared illegal by the government, assumed such un-American proportions in the Wolverine state that it was necessary to summon the military forces to prevent actual bloodshed and revolution. Although the automotive laborer received a better hourly wage than was given to laborers in other industries, his yearly salary did not average better than $800 for the past several years. I am speaking of the common laborer in the automotive industry, the mass productionist laborer. Although other industries long since had been organized and unionized, the automotive industry, at least that part of it concerned with mass productionism, had not been organized. Thus, when the United Automobile Workers of America launched their campaign to unionize mass production labor, literally hundreds of thousands of men flocked to the standards which Homer Martin unfurled. In the beginning, the UAW was an autonomous, independent union. Eventually, it became affiliated to the CIO, presided over by John L. Lewis, who had assumed authority of this gigantic labor movement. As time went on, it became apparent that the UAW was infiltrated with radical officers. Strikes multiplied. Contracts signed between the union and the employers were treated as scraps of paper. Chaos was impending, for it was understood by most persons that the multiplicity of useless and unauthorized strikes credited to the UAW was inviting repercussions upon labor itself. So at length, Mr. Martin, the duly elected international president of the UAW, initiated an investigation of radicalism within the ranks of his union. As a result of his findings, together with his board, certain high officers were found guilty of communistic affiliation and were expelled. Following this, a declaration was made that the UAW was still an autonomous union, not subject to undue interference either from Mr. Lewis or the officers of the CIO, and that communistic leadership within its ranks would not be tolerated. These and other things produced a crisis which, in the parlance of the laboring man, demanded a showdown. As a result of the showdown, the autonomy of the UAW was lost, the expelled officers were reinstated, the CIO and its officers gained the upper hand, and the ranks of the automotive laboring class were split. One faction cared little or nothing about radical leadership and autonomy. The other faction, which fought for autonomy and demanded that as far as the United Automobile Workers of America were concerned, there could be no room for radical leadership in their organization. Meanwhile, the American Federation of Labor was keenly interested in all these proceedings. It is true that the AFL, during its 80 years of existence, had been concerned more or less with organizing skilled labor. It is true that it had not expended its best efforts in organizing unskilled labor. But when it became apparent that the unskilled laborers in the automotive industry had lost their autonomy and had refused to exclude communist leadership, then the American Federation of Labor stepped in. All these events, my friends, so briefly stated, formed a background to last week's development. Admitting that the unskilled laborer in the automotive industry was paid a highly hourly wage, but recognizing that this hourly wage did not amount to very much over the period of a year, one of the first objectives advertised by the organizers of the American Federation of Labor was this: the principle of the annual wage. For many years, it has been my privilege to advocate that principle. For many years, I have contended and have sustained my contention with accurate figures and facts that mass production machinery, which is constantly being developed, enables a working man to produce more units of wealth in 1939, for example, than was possible in 1920. In other words, while the ordinary laborer in the automotive industry contributes more to the production of an automobile in one day of this year than his father could have contributed in 3 days 19 years ago, nevertheless, he does not receive 3 times the amount of an hourly wage. Now, I'm not proposing a theory that the laborer should be paid 3 times as much in 1939. I am only using this example to draw to your attention that there is a ceiling to production and a ceiling to the sale or consumption of automotive products, and to point out that despite the development of mass production machinery, the laborer must be paid enough to keep him and his family in secure, frugal comfort for the entire year, even after the ceiling of production has been reached. It is only a matter of time until the ordinary laborer will contribute 4 and 5 times as much to the production of a motor car in one day as his father contributed 19 years ago. For science will not pause. Inventors will continue to discover new and better ways of hastening production. And as a result, either fewer and fewer men will be required in our factories to turn out the demand for motor cars, or else all those now employed in the industry will be forced to work fewer and fewer days. Now, one of the principles advocated by the CIO for the betterment of labor in this industry was related to the hourly pay system. Among other things, the CIO struck for a 5 and 10 cent raise per hour They won their strike. But despite their victory, in this regard, the laboring men in their union were no better off at the end of the year than they were at the beginning of the year, simply because the cost of groceries, of rent, of fuel, of clothing, and other commodities was raised on the one hand, and on the other, because the time lost due to strikes to gain this pittance of a raise more than offset the financial benefits that resulted from the strike. Aware of all these facts, and taking all these things and more into consideration, the American Federation of Labor, on entering in earnest into this field, adopted the principle of the annual wage for the automotive industry. Now, I am not authorized to speak for the American Federation of Labor, but if I were asked to explain how I interpret this proposition of the annual wage, if I were speaking to a group of laboring men, I would use these words. To them I would say, gentlemen, do you know what communism is? Do you know its objectives? Do you realize that according to the Bolshevik leaders themselves and not according to their opponents, they hope to create a world revolution. They hope to destroy all nationality. They hope to play along with the international bankers and the plunderbound. They hope to reduce you men of the laboring class to a common level and keep you there. They hope to accomplish in America what they accomplished in Russia. Russia with its black bread. Russia with its slave wages. Russia with its subjugation of 160 million people under the domination of not more than 3 million party members. Russia with its antagonism to Christ and to God. Russia with its communist political party that was paid for and which is sustained by the gold mongers of the world. I do not pretend that this is a full explanation of communism, but I do maintain that you have more than enough intelligence to understand that you want none of it. What you do want is the liberty which our Constitution respects in this United States. What you do want is liberty of conscience. What you do want is to preserve the sanctity of your homes. What you do want is to supply your wife and your children, not only with the necessities of life, Mr. Laborer, but with the conveniences which should be theirs and which must be theirs if this will remain a free country. Oh, you're not experts in economics. You do not understand, perhaps, the workings of the law of supply and demand and the intricacies of money and credit. Oh, but this you do understand. You know that America is a land of plenty. You know that in 1935, when persons were hungry, we slaughtered pigs and burnt corn. When people were naked, we plowed under cotton. And when people were shelterless, we confiscated homes. Those things you know. You do know that when there was the greatest demand for food and clothing and shelter, for motor cars, refrigerators, and the products of your factories, that the factories were closed and that 3 million of your brothers were forced to eke out an existence at $50.56 a month on the WPA, or else forced to join the army of 12 million unemployed because there was no purchasing power in the country and because our government was interested in bailing out the commercial banks, which statement I supported last Sunday with governmental facts. You need be no economist to understand these things. All you need to be is the father of a family. A father who goes home each evening after having searched in vain for work that is non-existent. Go home to face your wife and your baby with an empty pocket and an empty heart. And above all else, gentlemen, you know that you are keenly interested in one material thing, and that material thing is what? A full pay envelope. A pay envelope that is guaranteed to you for 52 weeks in a year. A pay envelope whose existence will not be cut short because some factory owner tells you that production must be stopped because the people of the nation have no money to buy the things that you help manufacture. And there is another thing that you laboring men know, which requires no university professor's training. It is this. You know what's meant by the cost of living. You know that in 1 year your rent is $35 a month, and in another year it is $50 a month. You know that your grocery bill 1 week amounts to $8, and another week to $12. You know that your fuel bill costs 20% more 1 year than it does another year. You know that the cost of clothing for your family is 25% higher 1 year than the previous year. In other words, Mr. Laborer, you know that due to the cost of living, a pay envelope of $30 a week in 1 year does not buy as much living as a pay envelope of $25 a week does in another year. Oh, but you're not experts. You are not economists. Oh, you are only the men who are the backbone of the nation, composed of 30 or 40 million of persons who, like yourselves, were trustful, honest, God-fearing men whose only material desire in life is to work hard and to earn enough money to keep your lovely families from want and oppression. Gentlemen of the laboring class, particularly of the mass production industry, you have neither the time nor the leisure, nor perhaps the ability to understand the inner workings of economics. Oh, but you have the heart and the soul to understand that it is your duty in life to provide for those whom God has entrusted to you. And in simple language, the principle of this providing is a living annual wage. A living wage that automatically goes up when the cost of living goes up. An annual wage that automatically is paid every week whether you work or not. Is this a practical principle, you ask? Is this a practical theory that can be realized? Definitely yes. You are all Americans enough to know that the Constitution of this country positively says that Congress has the right to coin money and to regulate the value thereof. I emphasize that word. Regulate. Regulate. Congress has the right to regulate the purchasing power of a dollar. Congress has the right to regulate what a dollar will buy. Congress has the right to see that a sufficient amount of purchasing power is in the pockets of the public. Congress has the right to bail out the working men just as it had the right to bail out the commercial banks by pretending to give gifts to the farmer and to the potential home builder. And Congress actually has the power to do these things just as much as it has power to declare for peace or for war. Gentlemen of mass production industry, the workings of these congressional rights, perchance, are beyond your understanding. You are not lawyers. You are not bankers. You are not congressmen. You are simple laborers who have been booted from pillar to post, sometimes by men who have agitated you for a 5 and 10 cent hourly wage rate, which your experience now has taught you has meant nothing, and which historians in the future will refer to as a trick, not on the part of all, but only on the part of some, to herd you together to become the popular front behind whom will stand in security the internationalists, the revolutionists, and the godless supporters of Bolshevism. But gentlemen, poverty, less than living wages, and insecurity, these things are also within the scope of your understanding and of your actual experience. These things, I tell you, are unnecessary evils. These things are abominations in this land of plenty. These things are unsufferable evils, which your Congress and my Congress can liquidate if congressmen so desire. Do you remember 1933? Do you remember the program of driving the money changers from the temple? Do you remember how that promise was kept? Do you remember how the banks were saved? Do you remember how the debts were protected? Do you remember what I said last Sunday and proved what I said with uncontradictable facts? Laboring men of America, awake! Cast off the shackles of your despair. Be glad and rejoice that the American Federation of Labor at last has determined on a program of the annual living wage. Nothing to gain except a clear conscience for telling you these things, and I have nothing to lose by applauding publicly the adoption of the principle of the living annual wage by the American Federation of Labor. For almost 60 years, the American Federation of Labor has been operative in America. It organized the building trade, the musicians, the electricians, the printers, the machinists, and other skilled workers. To it is affiliated the great brotherhoods of the trainmen. And behind it is a history that is a credit, despite the fact that here and there amongst its ranks appeared political-minded leaders and racketeers. Behind the AFL is a history of constitutional Americanism. Behind it is the history of Samuel Gompers and his traditions of no partisan politics. Behind it is the history of opposition to Bolshevism. Behind it is the history of no foreign entanglements. Behind it are leaders who have held themselves free from the red rag of Russia and the black fund of Germany. And particularly behind the American Federation of Labor is the philosophy that a working man is more than an individual. He is the father of a family, a father upon whom depends for livelihood, for health and for education, and for support his wife and his children. Gentlemen, in my own philosophy, I find room for a strike that is an honest strike. But I have no patience with these pretended strikes which sink to the level of a racket. Strikes that are called not for the benefit of you who work behind the lathe, but only for the benefit of two contesting labor leaders. While I find nothing irregular in the proposed general principles of the CIO, I have watched you and your wives and your children as you are crushed between the upper and the nether stone of strikes here in Michigan and elsewhere. I have witnessed the calling of strikes when every informed person knew that they were in breach of contract, legally and lawfully signed. Thus I am happy to observe that as the American Federation of Labor enters into the field of the automotive industry, its officers have pledged that there will be no wildcat strikes, that there will be no intemperate strikes until your leaders, Mr. Working Men, together with the leaders of industry, will have an opportunity to come to a thorough mutual understanding. And your leaders in the American Federation of Labor will never be of the same type as Harry Bridges, the alien radical who has been more destructive of property in San Francisco than was the earthquake itself, who was no more constructive for the waterfront laborers when you take into consideration the loss in wages and time they sustained than was the fire which followed the earthquake. Oh, yes, the enemies of social justice will say that we pioneers of social justice are unfriendly to labor. The truth is, gentlemen, I have been unfriendly to what I have considered to be communistically led labor. The truth is, I have been unfriendly to those labor leaders who gambled your dues money. I have been unfriendly to those labor leaders who contributed thousands of dollars of your dues money to radical causes while your family suffered. Labor leaders who supported the red flag in Spain. Labor leaders who sent cards carrying communists into Michigan and elsewhere. Labor leaders who lacked the intestinal fortitude to expel the Bolshevik elements from high office. But God knows I have been for the working man and his exploited family, even to the point, gentlemen, of sacrificing some years ago your goodwill, when I preferred to stand on principle and fact rather than encourage you to fall into a trap, rather than applaud you when innocently you followed men who should know better into the errors which characterize the seizure of property. Gentlemen, I am opposed to the seizure of property by bankers, by government, by industrialists, or by labor leaders. The principle of unjust seizure is wrong. For it had been my dream, gentlemen, that instead of suffering the seizure of property by the rich, by the government commissars, it had been my dream, gentlemen, that property should be sacred when justly acquired. And it had been my hope that the millions of you who were never given an honest chance to own property should be paid an annual living wage, which would allow you to own your own little plot of ground and your own humble home that you could really call your own. A dream and a hope that could never be realized until you were guaranteed security. And having obtained your own little home, what about the principle of seizure of property? Having obtained your home, no principle of seizure could be invoked against you. Gentlemen of labor, you are not wards of the government. The government is your servant. You are not the regimented slaves of a communistic political party. You are, gentlemen, you are we the people of this Republic of the United States of America with the right to life, to liberty, and to the pursuit of happiness. And you are not and will not be the economic slaves of any system. Oh, yes, you are free men who can unmake one system that has exploited you. Free men who can ward off another system of Sovietism that plans to enslave. Certainly I've been a friend to labor, despite the canard which says I was responsible for building this shrine of the little flower and publishing social justice magazine independent of labor organizations. Ask the laborers and artisans who worked on the shrine, or consult the files and the records, and you'll find out the truth. You'll find out that those engaged in building this edifice were paid not at the scheduled rates of the American Federation of Labor, but 10% higher than the scheduled rate. And for your information, Social Justice magazine is produced in the largest union printing shop in the world, and will continue to be printed in such a shop, although opportunity has been presented to me time and again to have it produced elsewhere in a non-union shop for financial gain. Gentlemen of labor, once more I applaud the American Federation of Labor for its courageous, intelligent, American and Christian stand on the matter of wages. A living annual wage for all those men who have dedicated their lives and their energies to mass production labor in the automotive industry. A living annual wage, which, once enacted into law, will remove from above your wife and your little children the black clouds of insecurity. A living annual wage that will guarantee you a pay envelope for 52 weeks in the year, whether the factory keeps open or keeps shut. A living annual wage that will be regulated either up or down as the cost of living goes up or down. I said that this is a Christian principle. And to support my contention, let me read for you a portion of the New Testament according to St. Matthew, chapter the 20th, verses 1 to 14, that will help confirm my point. At least that exhibits the mind of Christ. It reads as follows. The kingdom of heaven is like to a householder who went out early in the morning to hire laborers into his vineyard. And having agreed with the laborers for a penny a day, he sent them into his vineyard. And going out about the third hour, he saw others standing in the marketplace idle. And he said to them, Go you also into my vineyard, and I will give you what shall be just. And they went their way. And again he went out about the 6th and the 9th hour, and did in like manner. But about the 11th hour he went out and found others standing. And he saith to them, Why stand you all the day idle? They say to him, Because no man hath hired us. He saith to them, Go you also into my vineyard. And when evening was come, the Lord of the vineyard saith to his steward, Call the laborers, and pay them their hire, beginning from the last even to the first. When therefore they were come that came about the 11th hour, they received every man a penny. But when the first also came, they thought that they should receive more. And they also received every man a penny. And receiving it, they murmured against the master of the house, saying, These last have worked but 1 hour, and thou hast made them equal to us that have borne the burden of the day and the heat. But he answering said to one of them, Friend, I do thee no wrong. Didst thou not agree with me for a penny? Take what is thine and go thy way. I will also give to this last, even as to thee. Gentlemen, I need not explain these words of Christ to you. They are self-evident. Plainly, he has painted the picture for us. There is the master of the vineyard gathering in his grapes. In yonder city, there's a marketplace where the jobless stand awaiting work. The employment agent seeks them out early in the morning and hires one group at a fair living wage, enough to live on for the entire day, enough to keep a family in frugal comfort. At a later hour, he engages another group, and finally, at the 11th hour, he engages the last. Now I ask you, When it came time to pass out the pay envelopes, the last received as much as the first. And what then are the high points of this gospel message? They are these. First, no man may hire another man unless he pays him a living wage. Second, according to the scriptural narrative, the living wage was not predicated on how long a man worked or how much he produced. Thirdly, why were these men idle? For the same reason, gentlemen, that you laborers in America are idle. No man hath hired us, says the scripture. Well, these men were not idle because they chose to be, any more than you're idle at this moment. No man hath hired us. And lastly, gentlemen, remark the contention set up in the ranks of labor itself when the last receives as much as the first. Mr. Laboring Man, cease fighting among yourselves. Recognize that if you have dedicated your life to a given industry, this is Christian doctrine. Recognize that if you have dedicated your life to a given industry, it is the moral responsibility of that industry to support you. Oh, it's dangerous to permit a state to support its citizens. Dangerous to permit the United States government to support you, because then you become wards of the state, no better than the slaves who plied the galleys of pagan Rome. Gentlemen, remember this moral principle. It is the business of industry to support those who dedicate their lives to industry. And it is the business of all citizens to support the state. It is not the business of the state to support either industry or the citizens. Once industry, either through its own volition or through the necessity of law, admits that it is industry's moral obligation to support the men who have dedicated their lives to the manufacturing of motor cars, of steel, of textiles, then industry will be glad to join with you to see that there is an ample purchasing power within the nation, so that the wheels of industry will be kept moving regularly. Social Justice magazine will support you, gentlemen, and will support the American Federation of Labor as long as that organization upholds this Christian principle of a living annual wage which is sufficient to care not only for the working man himself, but for his wife and family in frugal comfort. Thank God that at long last you laborers in the automotive industry have had this principle of the living annual wage promulgated to you by the American Federation of Labor. You laborers elsewhere, in other states, in other industries, for the moment, must content yourselves to hear of the progress made in Michigan, Ohio, Wisconsin, and wherever the United Automobile Workers of America have extended their activity. Oh, may this principle be realized in these other sections, in these other fields of endeavor, and may you laborers in other fields have the happiness to have the American Federation of Labor come to your rescue as it has done recently for the working men of Michigan. Meanwhile, gentlemen, be courageous and persevering. Always remember that this is America. And remember that this principle of the living annual wage is not a communistic principle, but is a Christian principle. It's a principle which deserves the support of every decent-minded person in this nation. Ladies and gentlemen, the address to which you have listened will be reduced to pamphlet form. I invite every one of you to write to me this week for a copy letter. And it will be my happiness to send you a printed copy of this address, which you should read, and a principle which, to my mind at least, you should support: the living annual wage. God bless you.
Ladies and gentlemen, may I now present the voice of social justice with an important announcement. The voice of social justice.
It is unseemly and unpriestly for Father Coughlin to stoop to contention, especially when it is considered either with religious or racial controversy. Thus, we, his friends and admirers and supporters, are glad that he holds steadfast to that opinion, are glad that he will not descend into the arena of such activity at the present moment. However, because of widespread libelous statements which are being circulated concerning him in Social Justice magazine, for which he graciously acts as editorial counsel, the editors of Social Justice magazine instruct me to make an announcement which is necessary in order to forfend an untruthful attack against both our friend and this publication. The Jewish Examiner is a weekly newspaper. The Jewish Examiner boasts that it is the voice of American Jewry. The Jewish Examiner claims to have the largest Anglo-Jewish circulation in America. For some time, this racialistic, biased paper has been insisting that Father Coughlin is a Nazi. That, ladies and gentlemen, is definitely untruthful. For some time, the Jewish Examiner has been responsible by its misstatements for stirring up ill feeling which reacts against innocent Jews. That is a misfortune. In its current issue, it continues with this practice with a full-page headline which reads, "Coughlin's Ben Marson is exposed. Reveals social justice writer as Boris Brazel, is notorious anti-Semite and white Russian fascist leader." These headlines and the news story which accompanies them are typical of many news articles which this troublemaking, trouble-inviting paper persists in peddling throughout the nation amongst its subscribers, who are victimized by such editorial leadership. To say that Father Coughlin is not a Nazi is an understatement. Definitely, he is anti-Nazi. To print that the erudite Ben Marson, who has been exposing the inaccuracies contained in the General Jewish Council's attempt to answer Father Coughlin's famous address of last November 20th, to say that Ben Marson is Boris Brazel, the so-called anti-Semite and fascist, is, ladies and gentlemen, an absolute untruth. To uphold these contentions and to advertise to the American public of what stuff the Jewish Examiner is made, Social Justice magazine authorizes me to say the following. Social Justice magazine hereby publicly offers to contribute $50,000 to the Jewish Examiner or to any charity named by the publishers of this highly inaccurate sheet, if it can offer any conclusive proof that Ben Marson is Boris Brazel, or that Ben Marson is even acquainted with Boris Brazel. Ladies and gentlemen, such slanderous, untruthful statements emanating from the so-called responsible editors of the Jewish Examiner into the homes of the innocent Jewish people relative to Father Coughlin and Social Justice magazines are a sample of the causes which are creating anti-Semitism in this nation today. Recognizing this, Social Justice magazine has suffered insults to be poured upon our beloved Father Coughlin by the Jewish Examiner and other racial publications which refer to him as a sadist, a sexual pervert, a Nazi, and similar libelous epithets. To attempt to bring such publications before the bar of justice is a waste of time in view of what has happened to the assets of the Daily Worker in its recent court case. Its treasury was found to be as empty as Mother Hubbard's cupboard. Therefore, there is nothing left for us to do but expose the Jewish Examiner and to stamp it by such an exposition with the hallmark of unreliability. Therefore, I repeat, $50,000 will be gladly given by Social Justice magazine to the Jewish Examiner or to any charity named by its publishers if these publishers can offer a legal proof that Father Coughlin is a Nazi or that Ben Marson is Boris Brazel. Furthermore, Father Coughlin authorizes me to say that if such proof can be shown, he will cause Social Justice magazine to cease publishing.
Ladies and gentlemen, are you a regular reader of Social Justice? Do you recognize that by subscribing to this weekly publication, you are helping to keep these broadcasts alive? Do you appreciate that social justice means justice for all, justice for the farmer, the laborer, the industrialist, the American, the Christian, and the religious Jew? Are you aware that social justice boldly confronts Bolshevism and Bolsheviks in a manner equaled by no other American publication? Please ask Father Coughlin to place your name upon our subscribers list at $1.50 for a half year. These are days when the fellow travelers of Bolshevism are trying their utmost to discredit staunch Americans and Christians. These are the days when support of a just cause is required more than ever. Please write this week to Father Coughlin asking him to mail you a copy of this day's address. And now, before concluding this afternoon's broadcast, here are a few words about this beautiful edifice, the Shrine of the Little Flower. There is never a moment in this beautiful edifice is not swarmed with devout clients of the Little Flower, St. Therese, humbly begging her intercession for some favor. Sunday, September 3rd, will be a banner day in the history of the shrine. Reports indicate that thousands of loyal followers of social justice and friends of Father Coughlin will be host of the Shrine of the Little Flower. Father Coughlin plans to have a message of great importance for the visitors on that day. Won't you plan now to be among those happy ones who will enjoy the beautiful liturgical functions at the Shrine of the Little Flower in Royal Oak, Michigan? Social Justice magazine carries information as to where interested parties may join the organized tours coming to Royal Oak on Sunday, September 3rd. Now, in conclusion, the Little Flower choristers and our organist, Mr. Guthrow, play for us Filii et Filii. Ladies and gentlemen, may I once again remind all those who desire copies of this afternoon's address to the laboring men to write to Father Coughlin directly at Royal Oak, Michigan. And until next Sunday afternoon at this same time, this is your announcer, Franklin Mitchell, bidding you good afternoon.
Ladies and gentlemen, we've presented the regular Sunday afternoon address of Father Charles E. Coughlin from Royal Oak, Michigan. Statements made and views expressed on this program are made on the sole responsibility of the sponsor and do not reflect the views of this station, its management, or personnel. Father Coughlin's address came to you as a presentation on your dial at 1250 kilocycles.